Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning or good evening, wherever you may be. And for those who are new in this platform, my name is Marilyn. I'm the CEO and founder of Customized Training Solutions Private Limited, or CTS. And we brand ourselves as Asia's most trusted training and business solutions partner. And we create programs that adds value and impact for leaders to stay relevant, adapt to the next normal, and ensure performance of a hybrid team. And this is actually a special session to ensure cyber resilience as well in your organizations. We have served over 4,500 leaders from over 30 countries, and that includes companies such as Petronas, Sony Mobile, Ayala Group, Meralco, Aboitiz Power, Manila Hotel, Brunei Shell, to name a few. And the reason, I mean, you've seen the data that I have just shared recently from my research from different news organizations that are specific to cybersecurity. And again, like in the Philippines, for example, according to Department of Justice, there's more than 400% of cases in cybercrime in 2023. And you've seen the rest of the data. And for today, I'm super excited to be able to have this session around securing the backbone, which is ensuring resilient ICT infrastructure. This is part of the second series, which is around ICT infrastructure, governance, as well as policies around cybersecurity. And today, it's my great pleasure to have David Robinson. He's the co-founder and the managing partner of And How Intelligence, where he leads the group strategy, thought leadership, and cloud and security service practice. He has close to 3 decades of deep technical experience in information technology and security, working in multiple industries from telecommunications, mining, shipping, to government and public sector services in the Asia Pacific and North America. So, without so much further ado, I'd like to invite David. Hi, David.
Hi, Marilyn. Thank you for having me here today. It's a great pleasure.
It's my pleasure to have you. And if I may add, like in our previous conversation, you mentioned about this, like being one of the top ethical hackers as well, right, in the world.
I
So,
like to think of myself more as just a continual student and a new. The competition's amazing in this space, and I actually did a multi-cloud cyber challenge,
mhm,
which was run by Pawn Labs, and I secured second place,
mhm.
which was a
Wow.
great achievement. And for anyone who's actually doing multi-cloud, I would strongly recommend you do check them out. It's an amazing platform for both those on the offensive and defensive side.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. So, right now it's going, right?
It's still ongoing. I think as of yesterday, 5, maybe 6 people have completed it. It's
Mhm,
been running for over a month now. It's an immersive experience.
mhm.
Very addictive, very challenging. You learn a lot. Highly recommended.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. And that's the reason why they have to listen to you as well, right? Being part of this as well. And I really love when you started saying that, you're also a continuous learner yourself, right? So before we start our questions, I'd like to invite again those who are watching us, whether live or on a replay, to join us in this conversation. Share with us what's your takeaway, and also, like, if you have question, I have tagged David here, so he might be able to help us answer this question because this is kind of like a little bit more technical for me already. So I'm glad I have the leverage to have you. Is there anything before we start the ask question and answers? Do you have anything else you'd like to add in terms of your profile or your experience around ICT infrastructure?
Um, I mean, really, as you said, I've been doing this. Actually, I think it's over 30 years now. I'm starting to feel older. When I started, I had a full head of hair. But
Mhm.
the key thing with security, as with anything in technology, is really doing the doing the basic stuff and doing it well. And it's just being ever vigilant. Um, you know, we never have enough money, enough resources, or enough time to do everything that we want. If we just do the basics well, patch our systems, know what, track our assets, understand what we look like to an outside threat actor, what ports are open, we make ourselves a harder target, and it's not going to stop us from being attacked, but it at least makes it more difficult. Right? We don't want to. If we're too easy, everyone's going to attack us. Um, but again, do the basics well, and you're in a better position than you were yesterday.
Wow, thank you for that. I mean, you're making it sound easier for every one of us, making it simple. Again, it's really going back to basics. And I do a lot of leadership and transformation interviews with thought and business leaders globally. And it's interesting, like, it's really always like, going back to principles as well, because that will really help us really like in this case around ICT infrastructure. It's really like putting the wall or setting up the foundations, right? Whatever you're doing, whether it's on leadership or even in this case is on ICT infrastructure, which is very interesting.
It is, and in security, actually in technology, but security more so,
Mhm.
there's always a desire to put in more tools, to spend more money on, the latest and the greatest. And if you don't actually understand who your threats are, where
Mhm.
the crown jewels of your organization is, what do we need to protect? What are the possible paths that an attacker could do to get into it? You're
Mhm.
spending money, time, and resources that none of us have an infinite amount of on
Mhm.
potentially the wrong things. So again, it's being pragmatic and creative at the same time, right? You may have a lot of systems, but if there's one bit of data that is your most valuable, then
Mhm.
you protect that really well, and you make it harder and add more layers for people to get through.
Mhm.
If you do that, you monitor it, again, you're already at better. Now, some of the systems on the edge may be subject to ransomware, they may get compromised, but again, we can address those through proactive measures. We can start to look at how do we automate our systems and infrastructure, and how fast can we get back online. But we're protecting what's most important. If you try to protect everything, you'll end up protecting nothing, and that's really the aspect to risk management: is what's the most important thing that we need to focus on, and what are the small incremental steps that we can implement. And don't be afraid to leverage open source software. If you haven't got your budget, it's better than waiting 6, 12 months until you can afford to buy a proprietary or commercial product.
True. And that's very interesting. We had that conversation, and I'm really glad that you're here to, like, so that more people can benefit around this pragmatic and creative way of doing or securing your systems and your business at the same time. So I'm just curious to know what are the primary threats to ICT infrastructures that organizations do face today? Because as you mentioned, it's really like, which one do I prioritize and which one is really critical for the business that I have, right? So from your experience, what will be these primary threats that most organizations are facing now?
I think if we look at it from a cyber resilience perspective, there's four main areas. First one is cyber attacks. That can be anything from info stealers, malware, phishing, anything that's malicious. Then we have insider threats, and insider threats are not, we're not talking about malicious staff internally purposely going out to cause havoc. These are just people maybe inadvertently opening up a port, inadvertently enabling a setting that creates an area of weakness. Data breaches is unfortunately a byproduct of the first two. It can also be through security configurations. And the last one is infrastructure failure. Now, if we look at all of these, to me, probably the most important is I look at the infrastructure sort of as the primary point, because if someone's able to compromise our systems or we get hit with ransomware and all of a sudden we're locked out of our systems, how fast can I build the infrastructure again? And how fast can I restore that information? Because that then leads into the incident response plan. If you are able to automate the instantiation and configuration of your infrastructure, whether that's on-premise or whether that's on a cloud or multiple clouds, and there are tools such as Terraform, Ansible, Polemy, there's a lot that can help you do that. That means that if a portion of your network gets compromised, you can redeploy that very quickly. The next thing is make sure you have really good backups, and don't just back them up, but test the restoration. So that way you know how long you can afford to be offline. And part of this comes back to the threat model that we spoke about before in the planning, which is, what is my most critical services, my infrastructure? What are all the dependencies for that? What is the sequence that I need to stand these up in? If you can do that, then what's happened is you've got a resilient infrastructure that you can redeploy in the event of something bad that happens. You can also use things like Terraform and Ansible to actually conduct a form of auditing on your infrastructure to look for changes or drift. So that's a declarative nature. So it says this is how the system should be configured. And by running that, you're at least aware if there's any potential changes. And you can also then use those tools to also patch, update, and keep the systems up to the most recent state. And this is really the essence of DevSecOps, or even DevOps in the earlier stages, is that everything's automated. And to me, that would be an area that I would primarily focus on, because we may not be able to stop all cyber attacks, right? If an adversary really, really wants to get in, they will. The other is, if they do get in, if our infrastructure gets compromised, how fast can we get back to being on operation? It also gives you options, right? We only have to look in the newspaper. Someone gets hit with ransomware and they get locked out of their systems. And the cost for that can be in the tens of millions to pay to get their data back. Right. Usually that happens when they realize that we've been backing up for years, but no one's ever tested that we can restore. Having a backup's great. If you can't restore from that backup, there's no point. Now, those organizations that get hit with that have an infrastructure they can deploy, have disaster recovery, are able to restore and get operations back, have more choices than those that don't. And that would be my personal starting point, is to make sure you can address your infrastructure data, then make sure you patch it, then work on visibility, right? You have a lot of good open source tools for SIEMs. You have, Wazoo, Grafana, Kibana, there's a multitude. Each one of these can be used to aggregate the logs. They can be used by your local teams to see what's happening. It's an evolution, right? Don't try and do it all on day one. Just start, right?
And again, that goes back to what you said, that it's really about going back to basic. And it's interesting, you actually somehow answered my next question already on, like, you've shared with us earlier, like, what does it take to have cyber resilience. If I can just summarize again for our audience who just joined in, it's really so much around cyber attacks, insider attacks, security configuration, and infrastructure failure, right? And what I'm flashing now is, like, I would say the answer to my next question around what are the key components that they have to ensure are part of the strategy to ensure that ICT infrastructure is secured, right? So one
Yep.
of these that you mentioned is really to have backups.
Backups is backups is very, very critical. Um, this comes down to, you know, having a risk assessment first, understanding what's the most important within your environment. You know, if I lose this, I can no longer perform, you know, I can't work. What do I have, you know, as my options? Access control, of course, is always a very important. You know, zero trust, least privileged access. Then we start to look at encryption. Now, you know, for anyone that has laptops or any mobile devices, they definitely should have encryption on that. If we have storage, even our backups, they should be encrypted. Everything should be encrypted, both in transit and at rest, because that reduces the likelihood of misuse. And then continuous monitoring. And all of this forms your incident response plan. And what do we do if something happens, and what's the triggers to you know, activate our incident response plan? A lot of people think that the incident response plan is a pure cybersecurity related aspect. When I got in IT 30 years ago, we used to call it disaster recovery and business continuity planning. And a component of that was an incident response plan. We seem lately to focus on the incident response plan as a master document, and the, you know, the backup, business continuity, disaster recovery is secondary. They all are a core component. They each, you know, if you don't have a disaster recovery, if you don't have business continuity, and you don't have an incident plan as to how to do all of this, you know, the time to actually go through and experience and resolve all of these is now, whilst you don't have an incident. And I'm a huge fan of running tabletop exercises. And the benefit of a tabletop exercise is that you can run through multiple scenarios and at least make sure that the people, the processes are in place, and that you start to create awareness of limitations. The second is, you know, we've had a disaster, we've lost our primary data center. What do? We can move it to the cloud. Do we have a cloud account? Who's got access to the cloud account? Have we set up the networks? Have we tested this? Do we control our DNS? As you start to go through these and ask these questions, and these can be facilitated by someone who knows how to run these, you'll start to realize there's gaps. And now is the time to fix those gaps. And these don't have to start out as massive undertakings, just a small scenario. You know, we've lost finances, you know, computers, right? You know, could you imagine if your finance or your HR department lost their computers and it was coming up to payday? That's a problem. How do you address that? Do we have a backup? Right? Then you can expand it and make it larger and larger and larger. But each one of them creates an awareness to start.
Exactly. And I really appreciate how you actually identified each of the actions that they can take in order for them to be able to have a strategy in ensuring ICT infrastructure. But what's interesting from at least the experience I'm having right now, um, like sharing about this upcoming summit on cyber empowering cyber resilience for organization, is that sometimes some people are actually or do think it's just really about the technology or the infrastructure. But again, from what I hear from you is that it also like takes creating awareness to the organization in order to avoid all of this and having the plan strategies, training also in place, right? It's really an entire ecosystem that they have to look into as well, when they actually secure the infrastructure, right? So I really appreciate how you actually put that together. It sounds simple, and yet like sometimes I like what I feel from like having conversation with some organization is that they're not even looking at cybersecurity as a major threat. Not trend is a major like priority an organization has to have, right? Which is very interesting because you've mentioned earlier like a case where organizations even lost millions of dollars, and some of them, in order to have this as part of risk and business continuity, is sometimes not yet there. Right? So I'm just curious to know, like, how can organizations actually identify all and address as well all these vulnerabilities within their ICT systems?
It's just to highlight on one point, we're
Mhm.
going back to people, process, and technology. To me, you know, we sort of flip that around and we think it's technology is the most important, then process and people. And unfortunately, AI sort of the boom with AI sort of is like, pushing people down to the bottom.
Mhm.
Um, it is people, process, and technology. Without the right people, without the right processes, technology doesn't work. And, you know, with anything, whether it's security, IT, that sequence still applies. Now, security, and I'm as guilty as this as the next person in security, we like to look at, you know, these are the actions that threat actors are taking. This is what malicious people are doing. But the key thing is that if we're talking to the business doesn't care about cybersecurity. They don't care about weak passwords. They don't care, about encryption, because this isn't in their experience unless they're a technology CEO or a technology board. Most of them don't care, right? And it's not because they don't think it's important. They don't understand it. They can't relate to what you're saying. When you say that, someone could get a hash from the NCDS did file and then use that to log in without knowing your password, they're
Mhm.
scratching their head going, what does that mean? If you turn around and you translate that to business, if we don't take this action, that's going to have a brand impact. That's going to have, it's going to cause these business related issues. Then they'll
Mhm.
pay it. And as security people, we need to start to learn to speak the business language. The business, I would say it would be nice if they learned to speak security as well, but that's not their job. The other
Mhm.
is if you're a startup and you're trying to dynamically grow, or if you're in a state of transformation, what's most important to you is trying to find product market fit, right?
Mhm.
Security is not your most important thing on day one, right? I'd like to say it should be, but I also know that it's not, because why should I spend the limited time, people, and resources I have trying to fix security for a product that I don't know is going to be successful?
Mhm.
Now, this is, again, do the basics, understand secure by design, and try to not put in, bad security practices,
Mhm.
but know when you have to start to take security more seriously. and have a plan to address that. It's a balancing act. No new company starts with security first. If they say they do, right, they're probably not telling the truth, or they're delusional. They're, to investors, the first thing is find a product market fit. Security is often an afterthought, but we should at least try to bake in good security practices to start with. The
Mhm.
other thing is documentation. Um, no one wants documentation, no one likes documentation. But if you're building something and you don't have time to document, at least do a screen recording of what you're doing, because a screen recording is the start of documentation.
Mhm.
You've at least captured the process and the steps. As you go, as you progress along, you can enhance the quality of that documentation, right? As you're building systems, as you're, doing stuff, bake the documentation in. All of these will help you in times of an issue, right? What might take you 4 to 6 hours today to sort out a problem, right? And you document it. 3 months later, you can't remember what it was, and you're going to spend another 4 to 6 hours when you don't have time trying to fix it. Document little things. It'll make your life easier. Right? And again, probably the key thing, you have to balance security with innovation and efficiency,
Mhm.
right? Too secure and it affects convenience, it affects usability. Too
Mhm.
insecure is really convenient, but
Mhm.
opening up a lot of troubles and you're going to have issues with risk, right? Security people with malicious actors, it's a game of cat and mouse. We do something, they do something else. We tighten it, they do something else. That's the same you need to do with your business. You know, stay ahead, don't go overboard, balance it.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's really been helpful. Like how can we implement all of these, right? In terms of balance and security with innovation and efficiency. And it's interesting how you reminded us it works uh, this way: people first,
Yes.
processes, then technology, right? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it really has to be like user by design. Like we had that conversation in our first three panel discussions, and we were talking about how we need to incorporate like people in the plans, in the processes, in like creating all these systems to ensure that it's being like efficient and it's being used or implemented fully in the organization. Because at the end of the day, um, it's really about like how can we make use of these systems, right?
Yeah.
That we, and strategies that we are currently like talking about, right? And it's interesting because part of my sessions in my upcoming summit as well is to have a workshop on how are you actually like communicating this to your business leaders, because as you've mentioned earlier, right, if they don't understand the language, they don't also understand why is this a priority and why is this important. It's really so much about like leaders in part of the workshop is really like educating the leaders on in terms of the risk that cybersecurity has, and how cybersecurity has to be part of the business goals and strategies that they have. And at the same time, a part of that also is like educating like cybersecurity experts or technology experts in terms of how do I actually communicate this to the management so that they'll be able to support us in this journey, right? In this like project or in this process that we may be able to implement. And again, like what we're seeing right now, and there are even studies actually that were done in the Philippines. I believe that's from IBM in a partnership with another organization where they see like how Philippines is still like somehow behind in terms of cybersecurity. And so it's really about creating awareness, I would say, right, in terms of like um, educating our people as well around this space. So that leads me to my next question. I believe we've also answered my question, right, around like how businesses can balance the need for robust security with the demand of technological innovation and efficiency. And that's the summary I've been sharing right now, which is really how to balance both, right, in the process. So that leads me to my next question or last question, that how can organization effectively actually collaborate with external partners and stakeholders to strengthen the ICT infrastructure security? Because at the end of the day, right, again, it goes back to like people.
Um, just before I answer that, I'll just go back to one thing you mentioned before.
Mhm,
Was there was an article after, I think it was the Phil Health breach, that
mhm,
was saying that part of the issue was related to procurement. Now, I can't comment on whether procurement was, whether that was the issue or not. But one of the things is that security also needs to step out of the ivory tower and roll up its sleeves and get their hands dirty, because it's very easy for people in risk compliance and security to sit there and say all of these things are wrong and you need to fix them. It's another thing to be at the coalface. And
mhm,
I've worked in operations. You always have a backlog of work. And if someone from security, when I was doing that, had come down and said, I've made some changes, here it is, check it. If you're okay with it, can we roll that out into production? You would have gone, wow, thank you. You've made my life a lot easier. Now, I would be willing to spend a little bit of time to actually implement that because
mhm,
they've done the lion's share of the work.
mhm,
And you're also then fostering collaboration. And by fostering collaboration with the relevant groups, whether that's developers, the infrastructure team, applications teams, um, and by getting in there, one, you're increasing your knowledge of the environment. You're understanding the business challenges that they have to face, because a product manager trying to get a product out, it's more about shipping the product than it is about, putting in a WAF or doing something else. If you
mhm,
can help demonstrate the value, then that's also going to help.
mhm,
And the other is, we need to stop waiting for the perfect solution and the perfect technology or for procurement to do something. And again, you know, if I can't afford to buy a high-end next generation firewall
mhm,
until the next budget, or I've got to wait 6 months for it to go through the procurement process, that doesn't stop me from putting in a firewall. There
mhm,
are open source firewalls. I can create a virtual firewall. I can repurpose, existing equipment to potentially serve that function, or I could use a cloud service. There are options that we have. They may not be the best, but they're better than having nothing. And this also is something that we need to change, right?
mhm,
We're never going to have as much money as we want. We're never going to have everything that we want. And if we do get it, please, and this goes to your next question about collaborating with partners,
yes.
don't accept the defaults, right? Don't leave the default usernames, the passwords. Take the vendors up on learning how to use the equipment. If you're buying a Cisco firewall or you're buying something from Palo Alto, go and learn how to do it. Challenge them on the security configurations. Work with them as a partner. And again, don't do everything in-house. One of
Mhm,
the one of the big things is, we spoke about this before. We never have enough time, resources, or money. Look at people that can provide you with threat intelligence to tell you where the risks are coming from. What's the priority of those risks so that you know where to focus those resources that you have, right? Also, as you're doing this, there's the aspect of vendor management. you need to also vet your vendors. You need to make sure that they're going to treat and handle the data that you have to the same standard, that they've got a good security track record. Because if we look at some of the recent security breaches, it may not be from the actual organization, it may be a second or third partner. Now, as a customer, if I entrust you with my data and you then give my data to a marketing agency who gives it to someone else, and then all of a sudden it appears on the dark web for sale, I'm not going to go and get upset with the third party that did this. I'm going to come to you and say, I entrusted you with my data. So you also need to make sure that you're holding your vendors accountable to your standard. And if they're not there, either help them raise the standard up or look for another vendor. And at the same time, this comes down to, we need to change our mindset. It's not about the cheapest anymore, right? We don't go and force partners and vendors to make it the cheapest it can be, because you get what you pay for, right? We have to make money. They have to make money. If we can, we want the product, we have to work with them to actually get it for a fair value, right? If we drive them to the point that they're making no money and no profit, do you think they're going to be responsive when it comes to security incidences? Or do you think they're going to actually, take our requests seriously going forward? It has to be a win-win. And probably the other aspect is regulatory compliance is becoming more stringent across all markets. There are, you've got GDPR, you've got the Californian Act, you've now got new states that have, if you do business with the US, there are now several different regulations and rules for how you can handle data for opt-in and opt-out. It's becoming more complex. So again, understand where your customer base comes from, understand the regulations that are there, and have a team that can at least help you stay ahead of those curves. Because that, unfortunately, is just, it's a cost of doing business. If we can't meet our compliance and regulatory requirements, in the event that something bad does happen, we might not be able to financially come back from it.
Yeah, that's very true. And thank you so much for sharing all of these very practical insights for all of us. And again, a lot of my questions is really on the how-tos for us to be able to help listeners or organizations who are actually watching us to find out more. How can they create a more comprehensive ICT infrastructure, security strategy, how they actually can address all of these threats and challenges that they're facing, and where do they start in order to have that balance between innovation, technological innovation, and efficiency. So I really appreciate that. And so we're actually like ending this session, but before we end this session, I really appreciate you for taking time to have this conversation with me. And to ask you this final question that I have, which is I would normally call as my Miss Universe or Mr. Universe in this case question. So I'm just curious to know if you have a magic wand that can and you can use it. What will you do with this? Particularly, I guess, in the space of ICT's infrastructure security.
Actually, I would focus on training for people. I would actually give them time to, I would do, I think it was called the FedEx Day. We're expecting people to work longer, but I would give them 1 day a week or 1 day a month, depending on the schedule, and get them to work on an initiative or something of their own choosing that will benefit the organization. And then, of course, the FedEx is, we absolutely positively will deliver within 24 hours. So they have that day to do something and to present it, because, technology is changing very, very fast. Security is changing even faster. The good thing is that there are a lot of cost-effective training solutions out there that cover everything from development, security, operations, automation, that give people hands-on experience that
Mhm.
will pay dividends to the organization. You know, if you invest money in your staff and train them up, you will be the ones that reap the benefits and give them an opportunity to experiment, right? And if they fail, it's part of learning. For me, that's the one thing I would, if I had that magic wand, I would like to see is I'd like to see organizations actually training their staff up. I think to me that's what's missing. We've pushed it more to individuals taking responsibility for doing that.
Mhm.
I'd like to see
Mhm.
organizations step in as well.
Exactly. I really love your final message because it's relevant to what I do. It's really so much around um, us providing all these solutions to be able to help more a lot of organization leaders from around the globe to really empower their team, to train their team really in different aspects of the business, not only in security, right? Because at the end of the day, you can expect that there's always a return of investment. It's actually difficult to measure, right? Especially if it's like a behavior type of organization. I mean, of training that we provide. But again, at the end of the day, it's really like an investment, right? That's what I'm also like noticing in like both cybersecurity and training. It's really the lock. I mean, it, it's meaningful and it's definitely an investment, but a lot of times it's not seen that way, unfortunately. So,
It's, I mean,
so I,
it's, it solves a couple of problems. If you invest in the people are engaged and with the company. Why would someone leave a company that takes care of their training, gives them an area to actually use those skills that they're developing, and gives them a career path for growth? If you do all of that, you almost don't need a HR department because those people will tell their friends who will tell their friends, and people will be banging on the door to come and work for your organization. You know,
exactly.
that's to me, that's how I see it. You know, I think an organization that empowers its people to grow, to experiment, to try, is what makes a company successful.
True. Thank you so much for that reminder. And I really wish you have a magic wand and that, you point them as well with me when they need that help or to train their people. But again, like with the work that we do, and even with this conversation, I would say, like, hopefully this would add value to the people who are listening, watching us, or will be joining us in the upcoming summit. Again, the main purpose is that really to educate, to create more awareness. And again, because cybersecurity is not just about the money, right? It may also like ruin your brand, stop you from, working operationally well, and even live sometimes, right? Depending on the industry that are being at. So um, that's the reason why we're actually organizing this event so that we can actually increase and empower more leaders, more organizations to be able to increase their cyber resilience in the organization and to educate more their people and know that it's not just about technology. And that's the reason why we're also doing our best to put together relevant person, organizations from government to private to be here to be able to understand how we can actually create that resilience, right? Cyber resilience that we're hoping for as well. Because despite that the risk is growing, but also our capacity to respond will increase, especially when we train our people, like what you said, right? And we always believe that when we work together, we can solve all of these cybersecurity challenges that we have discussed, and we can't get away with the digital era or like moving towards making or using technology or leveraging on technology to be able to like automate a lot of the things that we do nowadays. So I really appreciate all the reminders that you've shared, the very practical strategies and insights that you have shared with our audience. And thank you for your time, and also of course for our audience who will be or who are watching this session today. So with that, we would like to leave you with this quote that if you actually invest in your team, um, you'll definitely keep them. Thank you so much. Any other words or any message that you like to leave our audience with before we end this conversation?
Just start. I mean, that's really it. Just don't put it off. Just start small, you
Mhm.
know, iterate fast, learn, um, and, you know, leverage open source, leverage the information and the people that are out there to help you grow. Um, you know, that's that's it. And just do the basics. You know, if you do the basics well, you're already better than you were yesterday.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great message. So, thank you so much, everyone. And we look forward to having you in our future conversations. We're going to have one again on Wednesday. I have a special feature as well for tomorrow's UHY uh, run for a cause. And looking forward to having you to the Cyber Resilience Summit. Thank you. Thank you again, David. And thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.